Okay, guys, so today we're going to get more into computer hardware. Yesterday we talked about like the mouse, the keyboard, the speakers, and things like that, and you guys labeled that picture. Well, now we're going to get to the inside of the computer, what's actually going on in there. So, as the demonstration, we're going to just basically take a standard desktop computer like the one you see here in the picture, and we're going to open it up. Normally, I would do this in class, but since we're in virtual learning, we're going to do this online. So why am I doing this instead of a laptop or a tablet? Because when you open up one of these computers, desktop computer, you can actually see all the components inside. And so we're going to use this as an example. So let me go ahead and get into here. Now, all the parts that I'm going to show you that are inside this computer, they actually are the same parts, but of course smaller in a laptop, in a tablet, and in a phone. They all have these parts. So here we go. All right, so first, yesterday we talked about all these, the speakers, the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse, but now we're gonna go into the inside. So here's a diagram of all the things you can find in the computer. You have a power supply. On your older computers, you'll have a CD and DVD-ROM. You'll have a motherboard, also called the main board, but we're gonna call it the motherboard. You have a CPU, which is another name for central processing unit. And for short, they just call it the processor or CPU. That's where all the thinking of the computer goes on. And then you have a fan to keep it cool. You also have a RAM. Stands for random access memory. So this goes into the computer. This serves as like the memory for the computer. And you have a graphics card or GPU. We're going to call it a graphics card. Okay, some people call this a GPU or video card. We're going to call it a graphics card. You also have a sound card, which if you're into maybe podcasts and stuff, you might get one of those. You also have a hard drive. They used to call this a hard disk. We're going to just call it a hard drive because that's how most people refer to it. That's where all the data is stored. And then you have a card reader. Okay, we're going to get into all these components a little deeper here. All right. So first, we have our keyboard and mouse. These are peripherals that you would use on a computer to input. Okay, so these are input devices because you're typing data that will be input into the computer. So these are input devices. You also have microphones, which are input devices. And if you guys don't have a microphone, they sell these at Walmart and Best Buy for like 10 bucks. They're cheap. You can get one of these. Maybe that will help you with your class. This is the microphone I'm currently using right now, the Blue Yeti Nano. It's a pretty good microphone. I don't know if I sound good or not, but this is the microphone I'm using. And these are input devices as well. All right, now you guys are going to end up, pay attention because you're going to have a labeling assignment where you have to label all these parts. Not these ones, but the insides. You also have a DVD or CD-ROM. Here's an external one and an internal one. And you also have a card reader. So if you have like a fancy camera that uses one of these card readers to take the pictures, you then have to put the card into a card reader and put that into your computer to transfer those pictures or video if you're going to edit them or put them to your social media. And these also are input devices. You also have a scanner if you're going to scan pictures or documents, and a handheld scanner if you're going to scan barcodes or something. These are also input devices. Now, output devices. Why are they called output devices? Because these are taking what's in your computer and putting them out into the real world. So these are considered output devices like speakers, computer monitors. Now we see the super ultra wide monitors coming out. Your printers. This would be a inkjet printer, and this is a laser printer. You should be able to start being able to identify the difference. This is more for home use, and they're cheaper. This is more for business use. This is the kind I have in my classroom here. Laser printer. They print faster and they print with better quality, but they're more expensive, and the ink is more expensive too. The ink for one of these, if you're going to put new ink in it, can be up to like $1,000, and the school has to buy that stuff every year for all the classes. It gets very expensive. And the printer is also an output device. Okay, moving on. Now computers come in all shapes and sizes and colors, okay, but they all have the same components on the inside. Even laptops, tablets, and cell phones all have the same structure, the way they're built. First, you have a case, okay, and in your case, planted against the back wall here is the motherboard. That's where you put the motherboard, and everything gets plugged into the motherboard. So let's take a look at a motherboard. This is the main board. Some people even call it a main board that you have screwed into the back plate of the case. And let's go over this in detail now. You'll see that all of them have this center area. See that right there, that right there, that right there? That's where the processor goes. Okay, and once you put the processor in there, the processor goes there. You'll see to the right of the processor, you have these slots. Okay, you even have them here on this model, and here on this model, you've got 2 slots. That's where the RAM goes, random access memory. That's the memory for the computer. And then you have slots here on the bottom as well. You've got slots there, and you've got slots there. That's where the graphics card goes. Now let's say you can't afford a graphics card, or your computer doesn't have a big graphics card, then that means it probably has onboard graphics, meaning you just plug in the monitor or into here. Okay, so that's the motherboard. Moving on. Once that's installed, you got to put in a processor. Now there's 2 main makers of processors, Intel and AMD. Samsung is now making their own processors, and Apple is now making their own processors for their products, but they used to rely on other companies to do them for them. And for computers, the 2 main people are Intel and AMD. Now when you unbox these, you can see them here on the bottom. That's what the processors look like. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so this is what the processor looks like. All right, it's just a little, they're pretty small. Maybe the biggest is like, well, you can see it here in the hand. They're pretty small. You put it on the motherboard. Here it is on a computer. And if you look real closely at this picture, you'll notice that there's like some sort of paste on this processor. It's like a gray toothpaste looking stuff. What is that? Well, these processors get super hot, and I mean hot, hot, hot. Like they get hot because they're processing all this information on your computer. So they get super hot. So the people put that paste right before they put the fan on. Now, if the fan stops working or it gets unplugged, that computer is going to shut down immediately, because the process, it will only last maybe about 15 seconds and it'll turn off, because that processor will start getting way too hot. So they need to have some sort of fan to cool them down. And while these fans are already installed above the processor on the motherboard, you can see still the slots for the RAM right here in red. This one has some red RAM sticks installed. Okay, let me show you another example. Okay, here's another motherboard, and it's got the fan above the processor to cool it. You see the slots of RAM to the right, and you see the slots here for the graphics card. Okay, so the cooler the processor, the better and faster it's going to run. So people obviously want to have a very cool processor. So what happened? Well, the fans got even bigger. And you can see how big this fan is. It's even above the RAM and almost touching the graphics card. This fan is so huge. So they started getting out of control. So what did the people do? What did computer makers do? They said, we need a better way. So enter the water cooling. Now, water cooling, they even sell computers now that have this built in. This used to be like a big luxury, but now it's becoming more common. That's why we're going to go over it. Water cooling, now instead of that big fan, they just put this little block over the processor. And what it does is, as the processor gets hot, hot water comes out of that, goes in here to the radiator, cools that water down, and feeds it back to the processor. It heats up, and goes on, and that's just a loop that keeps going and going and going. So this is a water cooler to cool the processor, okay? And this is how it looks when it's installed. Here's the motherboard in green in the back. You've got a graphics card right here. Okay, you can see that graphics card. That's where you would plug in the monitor. And then on the processor, you can see that water block with the tubes to the radiator. So this processor is water cooled. Okay, let's look at another example of a water cooled processor. Here's another one. This one's very nice. This is going to be an expensive computer here. This one you can see the big radiator. It's a big, huge radiator, so they want to keep that processor very cool. You see the tubes feeding the water to the processor. You can see the RAM right here on the right, and you've got your graphics card here, and you've got your power supply. And if you look closely, you can even see the plug that it's plugged in, and you can see your power supply right down there. Okay, so this is a water-cooled CPU. Now let's dig deeper. Now you've got your hard drives. I don't know if any of you have ever seen one of these before, but your hard drive is where all your information is stored. Your pictures, your documents, music, your operating system like Windows. It's all stored here on the hard drive. Well, this hard drive here, these big silver ones, these used to be the norm, but they had a problem. The problem was that they were not that fast, and on the inside they have a little disc that spins around real fast, and if that disc gets messed up, you lose all your data. So if you have a laptop with a little hard drive and that disc is spinning and all of a sudden your laptop falls on the floor, you're more likely to lose all that data. Or one time I had a laptop on my couch and I got mad and I hit it with my fist, and that was enough to blow the whole computer. I lost everything. So to solve that problem, what people started doing is they started using these. They're called solid state drives, or SSDs, the one in the middle here. Now, if you buy a new computer, it's more than likely going to have one of these, because these bigger hard drives are becoming obsolete. They're not using them anymore. They're using these smaller SSDs. They're faster. They won't mess up if you drop your laptop. I mean, unless you drop it real hard, of course. And then lastly, you have your M.2 drives. These are like super fast. You'll find them, you'll find them on high-end computers. Apple's starting to use these on their laptops now. The new high-end laptops, they're starting to use these. These are super fast. But for if you're trying to build a computer or something like that, this middle one is fine. This is what I'm currently using in my computer, and it's fine. Okay, moving on past the hard drives, we're talking about RAM, random access memory. Okay, here's the RAM. This is like more modern RAM, but this is generally how RAM looks. Okay, this is how the RAM looks when it's installed. So if you open a computer, you'll see that it has RAM. This one has 4 sticks of RAM, and you can see the processor there in the back. This one here on the bottom right has 2 sticks of RAM, and you can see the processor there being cooled with a fan. You've got this one here on the top with 4 sticks of RAM, and they're even lit up. That's a new thing now. People are lighting up all their computers. And in the back, you can see the processor, and you can see the water block cooling the processor, and you see the tubes going out to the radiator. And here on the top left, you've got 4 sticks of RAM, and you can see the processor right there. So you should be able to identify, if you open a computer, where the RAM is, where the processor is, if it's water cooled or air cooled. Okay, moving on. And you've got your graphics card. Okay, this is a very old graphics card that isn't going to be very good, but you might come across those. This is the your better quality graphics card. So if you want to do virtual reality, or you want to do multiple monitors, or hook up a big screen TV or stuff like that, I mean, you could hook up a big screen TV too. Even this one if you wanted to, but it's not going to be as good as if you have one of these big graphics cards. All right. This is what the graphics card looks like when it's installed. It's usually there in the middle of the motherboard, and they can be pretty big sometimes, but the more powerful, the better. The longer it's gonna last you, and you're not gonna lag in games and things like that. If you want to stream or do all that kind of stuff, it's better to have a bigger graphics card. Or better, I shouldn't say bigger, because some small ones are better than some big ones. Moving on, lastly, the power supply. All right, this is where you plug in the computer, and this powers all your computer components. Okay, this is the inside of a power supply. Now, once everything is all hooked up, hold on. Okay, once everything is all hooked up, this is what it looks like. You've got, hold on, I think I skipped a slide. Okay. Once you got your computer all hooked up, this is what it's gonna look like. You can see the case right here. You've got the fan air cooling the processor. Your RAM would be right here. I think they've got 2 sticks, but it's black. You can barely see it. And you've got your graphics card right here. That's where you plug in the monitor. You see the motherboard in the back. You see your power supply right here, the cables powering the whole computer. You've got your monitor, your keyboard, and your mouse, and you're ready to go. And of course, Windows operating system. You can tell because of the window right here. All right, here's another example of what the inside of a computer looks like. If you open one up, maybe you ask your parents for permission and they'll let you open an old computer you got lying around. You've got your motherboard. You've got a real small graphics card there. You've got the fan cooling, the air cooling the processor. And you can see right here, you can see the SSD. All right, the hard drive right there, the solid state drive. They call it a solid state because there's no moving disk in there. There's nothing moving. There's no moving parts. And you've got your power supply here with all the cables. You can tell they stuffed them in here to kind of hide them. Here's another one. You can see you see the motherboard in the back. You see the 2 sticks of RAM. You see the water block water cooling the processor and the tubes going out to the radiator. You've also got the graphics card here, and the power supply is in here, covered up with that shroud. And this one's got lights and everything. All right, one more example here. In the back, you can see a fancy motherboard. It's got all this plastic on there to cover up stuff. It's real fancy. You've got a water block here covering the processor with the tubes going to the radiator. You've even got RAM that lights up to match the fans. And you've got a graphics card here, the EVGA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti. And down here, you've got the SSD or solid state hard drive. So those are all the parts of the computer. Remember, all the same parts that are here apply to laptops, except you won't find like water-cooled laptops or phones or anything like that, but they're all air-cooled. But your phones have RAM, a processor, and some sort of memory or disk space or hard drive space to store stuff. Your tablets have this, your laptops have this, your MacBooks have this, your Chromebooks have this. This is how all of them work. They all have a processor, RAM, motherboard, and a hard drive. Graphics cards, some laptops have them, some don't. Okay, so those are all the parts of the computers. You're going to have an assignment where you have to label all these. So that's my video about computer hardware.